Hello guys, and welcome to another podcast episode from me, Private Hire Mike. And this one is episode 2, the executive decision. Is Uber Executive worth it in London? So in this episode, we are going to delve into the world of Uber Exec, which is a premium service offered by Uber for riders looking for a more upscale experience. We'll explore what sets Uber Exec apart from the standard service, the benefits and the drawbacks for drivers, and ultimately whether it's worth pursuing as a driver in London. So, to briefly introduce Uber Exec is essentially a service offered on the Uber platform. And currently you have Uber X, you have Uber Green, Uber Comfort, Uber XL, Uber Executive, and Uber Lux. So there are quite a few options there for riders, and Uber Exec is the one just before Uber Lux. And we are going to be explaining the pros and cons of driving for Uber Exec in London and offering you insights and advice, basically. So the key features and requirements of Uber Exec. So basically, what do you need to get into Uber Executive? So to get into Uber Exec, the requirements needed are you need to be a driver with a rating of 4.90 or above and drive a mid-tier luxury vehicle. Now, when I say mid-tier luxury vehicle, think of an Mercedes E-Class, a BMW 5 Series, a Volvo S90, and I believe a Tesla Model S. So those are the vehicles which would be eligible. And remember as well that the car has to be a maximum of 5 years old, which would now be, at the date of this podcast, 2017. Now let's actually look into the pricing. Now, in terms of the pricing, I am not 100% sure. I couldn't actually find anything official. So what I'm going to do is actually add it in the description below as soon as I get the information. But what I tend to find with Uber Executive is you're looking at about £3 a mile. But then when the journeys get longer, for example, let's say you do a 50-mile journey, then you'll tend to get, at least this is what I have, £2 a mile. So I did a job from Croydon to Windsor. It was about 50 miles and I got paid £100. And generally, I think the minimum fare is about £7 and something versus the minimum fare on UberX, which is £4.30. Yeah, so like the main difference really with Uber Exec is, of course, number one, you're going to be driving a nice vehicle, which is going to be either your own or you're going to rent, and the pricing structure. Now, in terms of the target audience for Uber Exec, who are these people? Now, I've been doing Uber Exec since March 2023, and the people who I see booking Uber Executive the most are usually business travelers, so people who work for big corporations, upscale events, for example, the Chelsea Flower Show, or like a big concert at, for example, the Royal Albert Hall or the O2, and just generally people who are seeking more of a luxurious experience. Other people have also said, though, that they book Uber Exec because they find that the normal Uber service, i.e. X, is not reliable, and the executive drivers usually come to the job without cancelling. And I guess that's because there's more incentive to do the job because you're getting paid well. So that's really the clientele that I've seen, at least, as well as some people who are car enthusiasts. I've had a few people that just like more of BMW, Mercedes, those type of cars. So they like to be driven in one as well as driving one themselves. So yeah, let's now look into the perspective from a driver. At least I can speak for myself. So what's the motivation? What is the challenges when driving for Uber Executive? And of course, the main motivation is going to be to earn more money, to have better clients. And although that is the case, what I have really discovered is that Uber Executive makes up for maybe, let's say you do 10 trips a day, probably you'll get one or two execs. For the most part, you're going to get Uber X and sometimes Comfort. So that's one thing that you have to kind of bear in mind. When I first started Uber Executive, I was saying to myself, right, I'm only going to do exec jobs. And I just found myself waiting around. And that's not great, because how it works really in this industry is how much are you covering in an hour? It's all well someone saying, well, I done this job and it was £100, okay? But then if they didn't get anything for the rest of the day and they've done 10 hours and they've made £100, they've only made £10 an hour, versus someone else who's been driving all day, who's done 10 hours and is on £200 per hour. Okay, so one of the challenges that you'll find as an executive driver is that there won't be as many executive trips as you would have thought. Now, this could have changed. There are a lot more drivers now going onto the exec platform. And to be fair, the entry requirements aren't exactly that high. You have to do 1,000 trips, which you'll probably do in your first year, maybe even sooner. And your rating has to be over 4.90 and above. Most drivers that I've spoken to, their rating is over 4.90 and above. So that's basically the main challenge with exec. You'll find that it's not as popular as Uber X. And there are going to be times where you'll just be doing the normal rides. And you'll get people say to you, oh, it's a nice car, which it is. And, I just say to them, look, it's your lucky day. I've picked you up. Enjoy the experience. I also do Uber Exec. Now I'm going to look into the financial benefits of driving for Uber Exec, such as the higher fares. Definitely with Uber Exec, the first thing that you're going to notice is that the fares are higher. Like I said, for the local journeys, you're going to be getting paid around £3 a mile. As they get more long distance, the mileage rate does drop, but it's still pretty decent. I also find as well with the Uber Exec customers that they do tip more. So I've found that since driving for Uber Executive, I am getting more tips, probably averaging at about £25 to £30 a week, which is a lot more than I used to get just driving a normal Prius. And, the potential for, connecting with people essentially, because the type of clients that you're going to be picking up, they might be clients that potentially you could do business with outside. There might be more opportunities as you're rubbing shoulders perhaps with business execs or famous people, essentially. Maybe they might want to hire you as their personal driver. So that's some of the benefits that you're going to find with Uber Exec. The challenges again and drawbacks of driving for Uber Exec. The first one is definitely going to be the vehicle cost. As you know, driving a BMW 5 Series, driving a Mercedes E-Class, the entry price point is high. It's going to be more than a standard car, especially if you're used to driving a Skoda or like a VW Passat, something like that, essentially. Now, perhaps you're going to start renting. And if you're renting, I've looked at some of the prices, and even for like a 2017 Mercedes E-Class right now, you could pay as much as £200, £220 per week. And that's before you've factored in your diesel or petrol, your insurance, everything else. So the entry level in terms of the price is definitely a lot more. Again, as well, increased regulations, especially from Uber. So, your car has to be clean. You have to maintain your rating. The customers are also expecting more from the service because they're paying a premium. And then also you have to factor in other potential competition with other luxurious transportation services in London, One of them being Wheelie, the other one of them being Black Lane. Those are the most known. But there are other ones as well that also provide their clients with mid-tier luxury cars, such as the Mercedes E-Class or even higher. So now going into the advantages and disadvantages of driving for Uber Executive in London. So, let's start off with a positive. The advantage is you're going to be getting paid more. You're going to be picking up clients who are affluent perhaps, or more suave, let's just say, and that potentially can give you opportunities outside of Uber, let's just say. You're going to be driving a more luxurious vehicle, so you're going to probably enjoy your driving more than you would do, let's say, in a Prius. The disadvantages, however, of driving for Uber Exec in London is that you're going to be paying more money, either by finance or rent. Maintenance is generally going to be more as well if you've got a Mercedes or a BMW. And the other one is that you're not going to get as much Uber Exec work as you think you are. Okay, so those are some of the things to bear in mind. Now, I'm going to offer you some advice here, and I want you to take it with a pinch of salt, because I'm not really here to offer advice. But what I would say is, what you need to do first is evaluate your financial goals, the vehicle choice, and your demand. Now, if you live in a London suburb like I do, Croydon is where I live, the demand for executive is not as high as it would be, for example, in Kensington or Mayfair. So if you are living in an area which doesn't have as much demand, you're going to have to take into consideration that you're probably going to have to commute into work if you want to do the Uber Executive stuff. Another thing, though, is that I'll recommend, before you just dive in and buy yourself a brand new E-Class or a second-hand one, or a BMW 5 Series, or any vehicle that's eligible for the exec, rent one first. Do that for about 6 weeks to really get your teeth sunk in and see if Uber Exec is worth it for you. Now, we're only talking about Uber Exec in this podcast, but there are other companies out there who you can also do executive work with, and we'll discuss that in another podcast. Now, what we're going to do now quickly is examine the potential impact of emerging trends and technologies, electric vehicles, autonomous driving, and new rideshare platforms. So another thing that we have to bear in mind is that we're going into the whole world now of driverless cars, which is still far away. But one thing that we do have to bear in mind is going green. So Uber now are encouraging drivers to essentially have a vehicle that is electric. Now, yes, there are vehicles that you can use on the Uber Exec platform that are electric, but the price point is even higher. For example, if you factor in the brand new Mercedes E-Class, the electric version, I think the price point starts at about 70 grand. Think about a Tesla Model S. Second hand, you're probably looking at about 35 grand. It's quite a lot of money. So that's the other thing. Will Uber Executive be the main thing in the future, or will people maybe just not have as much money or desire to want to drive in a car or be driven in a car such as that? Maybe Uber might just only allow electric vehicles, and that means that the availability for exec vehicles on the platform is less, because less drivers can afford to buy a mid-tier luxury vehicle that is electric. Uber Exec in the future of London, will it be a viable option for drivers seeking a premium rideshare experience? Definitely so. I would definitely recommend anybody out there to give it a try. Like I say, before you go in and buy the car, rent one first, see how it works for you, and then after that, you can then make your decision. So, just to recap, in this podcast, we have spoken about understanding Uber Exec. So we've understood about what vehicle you need, your experience, the pricing structure, the difference essentially between Uber Exec and the normal Uber Exec, Uber X rather, and the target audience that the potential clients, and it's essentially what kind of money you're going to be making, which is what I'll finish on last. Now, this one is very subjective because everyone works differently. There are some Uber executive drivers out there who just do a few jobs and that's enough for them. What I will say is look at Uber Exec as another option to have alongside your X, your Comfort, your Pet, and just your regular Uber Surge jobs, right? I wouldn't recommend just to only do Uber Exec. I look at it as an extra option. And like all jobs that come in on my app, I always look at it whether it would be worth it for me based on the mileage, the distance, where it's going. Okay? So hopefully that episode has been helpful. I do apologize for maybe going off on a little bit of a rant. I am new with the whole podcast thing, but I hope you have found value in this episode. And if you feel like I haven't covered something, or if you want to ask me a question, you can do either here on YouTube, drop me a comment, or on Instagram at Private Hire Mike. Thanks for listening, guys. Drop me a like as it helps on the algorithm. And if you're not subscribed here on the channel, consider doing that to be part of the family. And I'll see you in the next episode of the Private Hire Mike podcast.